Welcome everybody, I'm Jesse, and we're going to talk about React Native and using it in a lot of different places, but in particular using it for the web and desktop. So if you have questions like during the talk, you can DM them to me on Twitter. You could also ask me, but if you don't feel like asking me, you just DM them and I'll check them at the end of the talk. All right, so I am a senior software engineer at Dick's Sporting Goods, our headquarters in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And my team is actually using React Native right now to build mobile and desktop app simultaneously. I also volunteer as a live coder for Free Code Camp, and I'm currently live coding a project using React Native to build a web app. And we're eventually going to put that on the desktop. So if you're interested in what I'm about to say, you can check out that live stream. It's on the Free Code Camp YouTube channel. I want to get the thank yous out of the way first, otherwise I always forget at the end. So I want to thank my wife, Becca. I have 4 kids, and she has them all by herself while I'm here. So a big thank you to her. And then everybody at NDC Minnesota. This has been a really awesome conference so far, so thank you. All right, so I'll go over some basics first, just in case there's some of you that have no clue what React Native is. So you can use JavaScript to build mobile apps. That was kind of like the basic concept of React Native. You write it in JavaScript. It looks very, very similar to normal React, but then it gets transformed into native code depending on the device, the operating system. So obviously different for iOS or Android. Okay. All right, so more people are familiar with React, more people use React. It's not that hard to go from React to React Native. So just go over a few of the differences. I'll actually show you some code later on, so you'll be able to see some of the differences. But some of the biggest differences are that in React, you can use everything that's available in the DOM normally. So I'm talking about like H tags, P tags, div, span, table, like whatever's there, you can use it in React. In React Native, you can't. So they have their own set of primitives. Some of them correspond pretty well, like your view tag. You'll use that pretty much anywhere that you were going to normally use a div. Okay, you have a text tag that would take the place of H tags, P tags, like anywhere you would normally have text on a page. Right? So a little bit different. There's also primitives for like inputs, so different types of inputs. So that's probably like the number one thing that you would see that's different. Also, a few other things. The way CSS is handled, React Native uses a subset of CSS. You're going to do your positioning with flexbox. So, and then your flex direction is also flipped. So the default flex direction is row on the web, and on React Native, it's column. So that's a little bit weird, but once you get used to that, all the actual logic, all your lifecycle methods can all be reused. They all work the same way. Navigation's another thing that's a little bit different. It doesn't work. And your storage. So you have local storage available on the browser. React Native, you have something called async storage, which works in a similar way. Behind the scenes, it's totally different, but it's similar enough that you could easily make the jump into React Native. All right, so if we have all these primitives in React Native that we could use, and let's say we have a web app already, and we convert it to React Native so that we can have a mobile app, instead of having 2 code bases, why not just have one? Why not just be able to convert the React Native stuff into DOM primitives? So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit. There's a few ways to do it. A few different packages out there that can do that conversion. It's definitely beneficial. Like I said, my team is using it right now, and our number one reason was we have a limited number of developers, right? We have like 5 engineers on our team right now. Not enough engineers to maintain separate code bases, which would essentially have been, well, 2 code bases if we'd go React Native and React, potentially 3 if we really wanted to go like native Android, native iOS, right? So we decided, like, let's just stick to 1 code base. Our team can focus on that, and then we could be ready for anything. Okay, so we have a web app, we have a mobile app, and we have a desktop app, all running, just all the same code. 95% of the code is the same. A few things that are like mobile only, desktop only, but large majority of the code exactly the same. Okay. So obviously, if you can make a change in 1 code base as opposed to 2 or 3 code bases, you're going to go faster, right? And the amount of languages you need to know is basically you need JavaScript, and that's it. For somebody coming from web development, that's awesome because you probably know JavaScript. Otherwise, I'm trying to think what's Swift. iOS is Swift, and Android seems like they always have some new cool thing. So like Kotlin, I guess, is the latest. It's all Java based though, right? All right, so here's the leading options for using React Native to build web apps. React Native Web, in my opinion, is the best option right now. Okay, so it's been around the longest out of all, well, about the longest out of all the options that are out there. A lot of what's available to use in React Native also gets translated to the web. Okay, so there's certain things that you can't use that are very specific to mobile. Things that use like hardware that's only on a mobile device that you don't normally find on a computer. Like obviously that's not going to be available. It's not going to translate over to the web. Thinking like cameras usually. I mean, some computers do have webcams, but cameras, like vibration features, like shake gestures, things like that, you don't have in the web. So anything dealing with that, you're not going to be able to use. Almost everything you can use. The only weird one is modal. You can't use the React Native modal. So there's the way that the phone handles a modal is so different from a browser, it just doesn't translate yet. But there's a lot of NPM packages out there to do modals that do work, so it's not really too big of an issue. React Native Web definitely has the largest community, so if you have issues, like I've almost always been able to find an answer with a quick Google search, so it's always nice. And you can use Expo. So if you're not familiar with what Expo is, it's a way to start up a React Native project and have a really nice developer experience. So it comes with some extra tools, and when you go to package your app, it's a nicer experience of packaging and updating your app. It's basically just a big toolkit for React Native development. You stay a few versions behind the latest in React Native because they can't keep everything in sync. But so you miss out on the bleeding edge stuff, but you get a lot more. You get a lot extra components that come with Expo. So it's a very nice experience. So being able to use that is a big plus. Officially, it's not supported yet. There's a branch under development. It works, but it does work. So I've used it. I'm using it at DSG, at Dick's Sporting Goods, and it works, even though it's not officially in Expo yet. Okay, React XP is also another option. This has been around for just as long, and so this was developed by the Skype team. Okay, so the Skype if you try to use the web app version of Skype, I believe that is built with React XP. So it's actually React Native running as a web app. Okay, so React XP behind the scenes is a little bit different. It sits as a layer on top of React Native, and it exposes like a subset of React Native components that will work on the web. So in a comparison between React Native Web and React XP, you have more native components available to use with React Native Web, but React XP at least claims to be, let's say, more solid, less glitchy, right? They offer you less components, but the components that they offer are really solid, right? So if you know that you only need a certain set of components, this might be a good way to go. Also, if you use TypeScript, this whole thing is built with TypeScript, so you might have a better developer experience if TypeScript is your thing. Okay, and this is also, it's great that there's a team behind it that has this in production, right? They have a vested interest in keeping this up to date and working well, so that's always a plus. And you may have seen the announcement about React Native for Windows. I'm going to talk about that later. So also came out from Microsoft. So it's a little bit interesting that they already have this, but now they're coming out with React Native for Windows as well. Okay, so React Native DOM is a really awesome concept, a really great project. Unfortunately, it is not production ready yet. It's not actually close to being production ready. So I'm putting it in here just to make you aware. And if anybody is really interested in contributing, that would be great, because definitely need some help. But it has a lot of awesome features that would improve performance. So like just a few, like multi-threading. You use the same bundler for mobile and web. So like right now, you would have two different bundlers if you went with React XP or React Native Web. So you have totally different build processes for your different platforms. React Native DOM just combines it all into one, which is very nice. And then you have layout parity. So I talked about the subset of CSS earlier and using Flexbox with React Native. So there's this package called Yoga that makes that all work so that CSS designed for the web actually translates well on mobile. It works almost all the time, but occasionally there are differences in your layouts. So React Native DOM fixes that using WebAssembly, and I don't know all the details about how it works, but using WebAssembly they fix that so you actually have true parity between your layouts. They could be exactly the same. You don't have to worry about discrepancies. So this is very promising. Unfortunately, it's just, if you have a side project or something, it's cool to play around with, but definitely don't pick this for like a real project. All right, so you're not limited to the web either, right? So you can use Electron. So if you have a web app, you can obviously use Electron and run that on Windows, iOS, Linux. React XP has an experimental way to render directly to a Windows app, like a Windows 10 app. And now, as of a few days ago, Microsoft also has React Native for Windows, which allows you to use React Native to build apps. So this is the really weird thing, is that they have two different projects now, two different teams. They're both kind of doing the same thing. I'm kind of wondering if they were working together at some point to say, like, basically that React XP was trying to incorporate React Native for Windows. I'm not sure how it went on behind the scenes, but now it's its own thing, and it's really cool. Like they say that it'll work on like tablets and Xbox and mixed reality devices. Which seems pretty awesome. I kind of really want to make an Xbox React Native app now, just to see it, just to do it. But so that really opens you up to so many platforms for React Native. Now it's one Codebase, and you have I don't even know how many that is, but you could have, I don't know, 10 or so targets. I mean, if you really want to break it out and have Windows, Linux, everything, like, we're getting close to 10 different build targets, 10 different platforms that you could use this for. And I don't list them all, but there's other projects to turn React Native into like VR stuff. There's some odd ones that I've seen in like creating a Word document straight from React Native. So there's some that I like wonder about how useful that would be, but they're out there. Also, if you're interested in React Native for Windows, I plan on live streaming, attempting to convert my React Native app to Windows. So that'll be coming on YouTube soon. So check that out if you're interested. Okay. So here's some of the companies that are already using this stuff in production. So React Native Web is used for Twitter. So their mobile web app is React Native Web. Uber uses it for their, so for Uber Eats, the app that the people at the restaurant get to manage like what's available on Uber Eats from that restaurant, it is React Native Web. Major League Soccer also uses React Native Web, and they have like documented through YouTube videos and blogs their whole process. So it's pretty interesting to read through what they went through, their decision-making process, and their pain points as they used React Native Web. A few other ones: DataCamp, Flipkart. React XP seems to be mainly just used by Skype at this point. Not as many projects. I found Monterail is about the only other project that I could find from a quick search that was using this in production. And probably within the next year, we can add Dick's Sporting Goods to the list for using React Native Web. Okay, so yeah, like I said, I'm creating this live. I think we're up to maybe like 9 or 10 live streams at this point that have been recorded, so about like an hour each. So we're not really that far into the project. I'm going to bring up some of the code just to show you like how it looks in a minute, and the code is there on GitHub. So I'll leave that up for a second in case anybody wants to take a picture, whatever, and go there. All right, and then also, again, you can DM me questions. Okay, check me out on YouTube if you have questions or want to see it live. All right, now let's do some code. Let me flip this over. Let's make that a little bigger, right? Is that better? If we turn the lights, it might be, is it right there? Yeah, can we turn off, maybe just try to turn off the front lights a little bit? Yeah, the dark theme is hard to see when it's bright. Okay. All right, so this is a really basic app. I'll scroll up to see what we're importing. Actually, let's start with the package JSON. That's where I always start when I'm checking out a new project anyway. I want to see what's involved here. So the package JSON is surprisingly simple for a project like this. So we don't even have to bring in React Native at all. We have React, React DOM, and then React Native Web contains React Native. Right? So we don't have to explicitly pull it in. I've built this out using Create React App, so that's why we have the React scripts here. So Create React App is a very useful tool. It's great that you can use it with React Native Web. because it handles all your Webpack config stuff for you, which I'd never like to mess with Webpack configs. So it's nice and easy with Create React App. Okay, and then you can just use your normal start, right? So this is the built-in scripts that come with React Native Web. The only thing we've added is some end-to-end tests with Cypress, and we added some GitHub Pages deploy stuff. But basically, it's the same. Everything else is pretty much just standard Create React App. So this is, I would say, almost the bare minimum that you would need to get this working. All right. So right now, since it's a small app, and I said this is a game. Right now, this is a math game for children to learn basic math. So I'm pretty much building this for my kids to learn math. This is based on a game I used to play on a whiteboard with my son when he was learning math. We called it like battle math, right? So we actually called it orc math at first, but I didn't want to get sued by the Tolkien estate for New Line Cinema. So I decided to change it to battle math. So I thought it would be cool to just translate that over, and instead of writing it on a whiteboard, we just make an app out of it. I'll run it in a minute, and it's not great. It works, but it looks terrible right now. All right, so our imports in terms of what we're importing from React, we are using the context API. We're using React hooks, so those are kind of newer things, and so we're importing those. But everything that we grab from React Native, you can see we have this style sheet. So your styles normally in React Native, you put in a style sheet. If you've done styles in React before, it's very similar. I would definitely recommend using style sheet because there's some stuff behind the scenes that happen that makes it more performant. Okay, so you can put inline styles in, but using style sheet, and once we get down a little bit farther in component, I can show you how we do that. But you basically convert your CSS styles into a JavaScript object, camel case them, and it's actually unitless in React Native. So no pixels at the end, no EM, anything. You just put the number. Okay. You see we're using like text inputs, buttons. Touchable opacity is just kind of a lower level of button, right? So button comes with styling based on what operating system you're on, and touchable opacity lets you use your own styling for a button, right? And we have the picker is like a drop-down menu, be a select, like it converts into a select input. Okay. All right, but that's it, pretty basic. And I'm going to skip by the functions here because those would be different for every project. But now when we actually get into the JSX, you see there's no DOM elements. All right, we're using views. We still have the same, like we're using style. You can see we do have some inline styles here mixed with the style sheets. And it should look very familiar to normal JSX. We just have now these components that have come from React. Okay. This is a little ugly. We just put this in the last stream and didn't pull it into other component. That's an inline SVG. Okay, so you can actually use SVGs just like this with React Native Web. This will not work if you try to run this on mobile, though. So at that point, you need to pull in a package to use SVGs on mobile. So not a big deal. You just pull in a package. You put in an if statement, more likely like a ternary, to say like if it's web, use the plain SVG. If it's mobile, use this other package. So that's the basic code. My point in showing you the code is just to say like, all right, this is for sure React Native. Like there's nothing weird going on here. With the exception of that SVG, all this code is normal code that could run on a phone, like a normal React Native app. Okay, but when we actually run it, and we get to see what it turns into, yeah, I do have yarn start up there. It's hard to see, right? Okay, let's try that. I'm running my slides on port 3000, so I got to use a different one. I knew it would pop up in the other screen. Let me move this over. Sorry, I guess I'm on the wrong side. There we are. All right. So get ready for some excellent design here. I keep losing my mouse. Sorry about that. There we go. All right. So this is we on the last live stream we decided like, hey, let's make some themes that look better, and so we went on one of those sites that just like pops out a color scheme, and we put it in here, and it looked terrible. So this is going to change, but this is the game. You have your hero over here, and you have your enemies here, and you know when you do your math problems, if you get it wrong, let's see. Didn't change the color for the input. So you get it wrong, more enemies appear. You get it right, the enemies disappear. You know, you get a nice little good job, you won message when you finish, right? So we do have different color schemes, and they're all equally amazing. So for all your addition, subtraction, all that, right? So the cool thing is, when we inspect this, it popped up on the other screen again. This is killing me. So we can inspect this. And it's nice being able to use the normal dev tools. I will say, even if you don't really have the intention of using it as a web app, at least at first, it speeds up development time because you can use your normal dev tools. Right? And it's way less, like in terms of computing power needed to run this, it's way easier on your computer to just run a browser than to actually run an emulator. So to like open up Xcode or Android Studio, and like if you even have enough space on your machine to download Android Studio, like it's easier to do this. You could get pretty far in your project before you ever have to open up an actual simulator. So it's great for you know, if your machine's not that good or you just want to do some development on an old laptop or something. Like this works well. Let me make that bigger. All right. So you can see we have divs, right? We have that select input, and we should have. There should be some span somewhere in here when we get down to the text. You can see mostly it's divs. All the styles and everything have been added in. I forgot to show you the styles. We can go back to that. But this is all like regular HTML. And we wrote it all in React Native. There we go. Did it put it into there? I guess I'm not sure what it does, how it determines whether or not your text is going to be in a div or a span, but sometimes they're in spans, sometimes they're in divs. Okay. But that's what you end up getting. Okay, let me go back. There it is. Okay. So I said I would go over the CSS. So let me. Oh no, that's my slides. Sorry. Oh, my slideshow is actually built in React. So I'm no good with like PowerPoint or anything. So Spectacle is from Formidable Labs, lets you build slides in React. All right. So styles down here. If you use React Native, you'll be familiar with this. But basically, you know, you just have like a JavaScript object So you have keys, and then your values are objects that contain your CSS. So think of this like your classes, right? Your keys are like your classes, and then these are all, your CSS properties. So like I said, it is a subset. So occasionally you may try to use something and you'll see it pop up in the console like you can't use this. So that will happen. But otherwise it's pretty much the same. So obviously it's unitless. So we just have the numbers. If you go into DevTools and check it out, it converts into pixels, right, for web. Yeah, but you can put styles on, you can have multiple styles on a component, and you can even do different style sheet.create. So you don't have to do it all in one style. We have one that's called theme as well. That's just for those awful colors that you saw. And we only use that on the elements that actually need to get theme colors, right? Let's see. All right, cool. At this point, I will either actually do some live coding with this and see how it goes, or I'll take some questions. So if you have questions, ask them now. If we have time, then we'll do some code. You have a question?
I'm coming from an Angular background, so it's kind of weird to see the template mixed in with all the code.
Oh, okay, good.
Is that a normal practice?
That's a great question. Yeah, so if you're coming from something other than React, you're probably always heard like you separate your HTML, your JavaScript, and your CSS should be separate. And that's like the paradigm that was forever, right? I don't remember a time in web development when that wasn't recommended. With React, it was shocking because that changed. So the idea in React is that you have these components that are self-contained that could potentially be pulled out of a project and used somewhere else, and it would function in the same way. If you need to plug in data, you plug it in, but it's the same component. So in order to be self-contained, it needs to have not only the logic, the JavaScript, the markup, but the styles all right there. So it's definitely a totally different way of looking at it, but that is normal for React. And in fact, that's one of the benefits of it, is that you can reuse these components and you don't have to worry about having the styles. So it's weird to get used to at first. It was definitely really really weird, but once you get used to it, it's kind of nice. It's nice to just look at one file and you know what's happening. That was a really good question. I'm glad you asked that though. What's that? Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. So you said Vue.js does that as well. So I haven't had a chance to do much with Vue yet, but I've heard really good things about it. So I know I've heard of similar efforts in Vue to be able to use Vue for things other than web. So I don't know how far along that is, but potentially if you're a Vue person, there may be ways to render to things other than the web. Right? But like I said, I haven't used Vue, so I'm not 100% sure. I know there were some other hands. I assume that you're thinking about accessibility when you're asking this question. Okay, so the question was, is it possible to use semantic HTML? So accessibility is definitely a big concern, and when we're using primitives that aren't DOM primitives, it's hard to think about that, right? Because normally, like if you use semantic HTML, you're already like on your way to having an accessible site, right? If you use them properly. So I would say you can't just have semantic HTML here. Like you couldn't write semantic HTML, right? It could potentially get turned into semantic HTML. That would fall on like the people who are maintaining React Native Web or whatever you're using to make sure that happens, right? But in terms of as a developer, there's only so much you can do. You can use like your ARIA labels in here, and they will get translated over to the DOM. And I'm like, my thoughts on this kind of go like more big picture, in that the DOM elements that we have now were created in the 90s for a very different web. Maybe they're not the best things to use for the web. Like, we're making DOM elements do so many different things that was never even thought of back when they were created, right? If the web, like, I'm not saying React Native is the new everything, right? But if we shift towards an idea of having universal, primitives that can be used on a variety of platforms, then maybe we need to think about how to make those universal primitives accessible on a variety of devices. And so, like, best practices and accessibility that were based on DOM primitives now would have to be rethought and based on these universal primitives. So I think right now it's harder to make things accessible because you're not like directly writing HTML. But I think if we're going to go down this route and more people are going to start using this, which may or may not happen, then there needs to be more of like a big picture, like, okay, like if this is going to run on multiple devices, how do I make sure it's accessible on multiple devices? There needs to be things built into React Native and any of the other packages used to turn React Native code into other code. Like, it needs to be baked in, right away. So I'm not 100% sure like how great the accessibility is. I know it's there. It's not like if you go on React Native Web, like there is stuff about accessibility and how to make it accessible, right? I personally don't know how good it is though. But that's like, and I don't know how that's like a bigger conversation when a lot of people are going to be involved in that. And but I think it should, like, does that make sense? That, I mean, because we're talking about way more platforms. There's going to be huge differences in how we make those platforms accessible. So I think it's going to be a much tougher problem to solve than what we're trying to do on the web. Did that answer your question? Okay, thanks. All right, any other questions right now?
So, obviously there's like a case to be made for a mobile app that's like completely different than the web because, different functionalities and things like that. So, for instance, like Facebook, their website, super different than their app. Some of the same functionality, but like layouts and everything are completely different. How would this kind of fit into a situation like that?
Okay. Yeah, good question. I think for very large companies like Facebook that can afford to have different teams that specialize, it makes more sense for them to have teams that are dedicated to web, teams of iOS developers that can write. That makes a lot of sense. For most other companies who may not have those resources, then that's where something like this makes more sense, right? So even for instance, like at DSG, like we're a pretty large company, right? We have like over 800 stores, right? It's pretty large. But it still doesn't really make sense for my team to split into multiple teams to build essentially something that's going to end up being the same thing and doing the same thing for multiple platforms. So there would be no value in that. Like we wouldn't be able to recoup the cost of all those extra engineers and all the time spent. So I think it just depends on the situation. And like you said, how different does the app need to be? Some apps could be exactly the same as the web with the exception of layout differences. And some apps are very different. So this is not the solution for everything, right? And even like there are some apps that will use features of the phone that would be very difficult to access through React Native. Like there are some drawbacks. Debugging is a little bit more difficult. right? Because this gets translated. There are some solutions out there to help make debugging better, but just on its own, debugging is difficult. If you imagine you're running it on a phone, it's not running JavaScript on the phone, it's running something else. You get an error, and now you have to try to figure out, like, where in my JavaScript did this error occur, when your error message is showing it in some file that's, let's just say, like a Java file, right? Or it's really, there can be some issues, right? So there are packages that can trace that back. So it's getting better. But there are like, if you're a company that can support multiple teams, sometimes it does make sense to support multiple teams. But I would say, like, there's probably these big companies at the top, and then the majority of companies are not in that position to have whole teams of engineers do that. But that was a long answer for your question. Did it answer that? Yeah. I personally have not run into errors that were so crazy I could not trace it back, though. So like that, it's a possibility, but I mean, don't be too freaked out by that. It's usually not that bad. Like there are tools you can run. I wonder if I can run it. Let's see if I can run this. Do you guys care if I can run this as mobile? I can't use Expo to run this because Expo doesn't yet support React hooks, but the latest version of React Native does support it. There's a small possibility this might just freeze everything up because while it goes through the process of building this. Let's see if I can. It's gonna be weird trying to do it from here. Let me. I believe it starts. Let's see. Oh no, I don't have it on here. All right. Yeah. What is it? G? I think it's that. Thought I had this on here already. Maybe that's not the right command. Lowercase? All right. That's why I love live coding, because I mess up and immediately somebody's like, oh, this is what you did wrong. So I guess it's not working. Maybe I'll just try to do it. Yeah. That's what am I doing wrong? What is, maybe I gotta. The yard. Maybe.
Oh, you just say global with yarn.
Did you say global?
Just say global.
Global. All right, cool.
Yeah. No dash in the front.
No doubt. Oh, okay. I probably did it out of order though, right?
I don't think it matters.
Doesn't matter? All right, let's see. Yes. Okay, cool. So, oh, that's pretty fast. I thought it was going to take a while. All right, so just to warn you beforehand, the last time I gave this talk, I decided to do live coding as well, and we tried to add something, and I was like, all right, yeah, like, now let's see it in action. And it totally didn't work. So that happens. But the idea is, like, we're okay, like it should have worked. I still don't know what happened. All right, cool. So we should be able to use React Native. You know what? I probably need to close the terminal and open it again. It does not recognize that. It's probably going to make me close this completely, huh? All right, and now let's close my recent. We just installed it, right? The install worked, didn't it? I'm gonna try it in iTerm.
If you do a list space minus G, it'll list your globally installed.
Okay. I just did it on my other screen here. Let's see. I hope this is in alphabetical order because it's a long list. All right. I don't know why is it doing that? And I just got rid of the console where I could have looked to see if it, if it actually worked. I can't read. All right. Well, we could try to just do. Let's try to.
So could you do NPX React Native start?
Let's try that. Yes. Thank you.
I still can't explain why that global failed though.
Yeah, that's.
But did we see it actually run the whole install?
I
wasn't looking at that moment.
Yeah, I wasn't looking either. It just looked like it was doing well and just assumed it worked. Maybe it didn't. Okay, so this part might take a little bit. So let me make this bigger so we can see what's happening. So this is using that Metro bundler. So Metro bundler is the standard bundler. Facebook created that. This is how you're going to actually like convert your stuff into iOS and Android. It should be creating some different folders. Let's see if it's doing that. At some point.
So it's
Looking for
NPX
files.
files anywhere in this directory and all its children?
Yeah, it should be. And it may be that I've forgotten like a config.
Because it doesn't say /source, which is what was odd to me. I was thinking it would want to be more specific than merely the root of your project folder.
Actually, you know what? It might be. I might have messed it. It might want a config file since I use create React app to start this off. And if I would have gone the React Native route first, it probably would have come with the config stuff. So look this up. Oh, okay, yeah, I believe there's an init that I skipped. And also, I should have installed the React Native CLI and not React Native. That was the problem. All right, let me stop this. There we go. All right, cool. So that worked, hopefully. It looks like it worked. Still not fine. Maybe this is where I need to do a different terminal. It's not just me, right? When you install something globally new, sometimes it doesn't run in the terminal right away. You have to restart. Okay, yeah, just making sure I'm not crazy here. Did I really? Yeah, it did say global. I guess the dash is necessary then for global. All right. Let's see, global. Okay. That actually did install React Native CLI, right? Let me check my package JSON and see if it installed. So we did get React Native installed and React Native CLI. I think you're right. So it thought I was trying to install React Native CLI and a package called global. I'll definitely not be committing this. All right. Okay, so I have 8 minutes left. Probably not going to make this work in 8 minutes. So definitely a live code fail. But if you do want to see this, we are going to do this process live on Free Code Camp's YouTube channel. So definitely check that out. So you will get to see it. Sorry I couldn't make it work here. It was kind of ambitious, but it's always, I don't know. I always have more fun when it's something that I haven't tried before, like live, you know? But anyway, so what would happen if we had gone through the process and it had worked is what I probably would have needed to do is actually have the file, like the correct files you would get when you run an init, which I didn't try to run. Then you could do React Native start. Okay, what would happen is it would pop up, and if you're on a Mac, you could then use Xcode to run a simulator, and it would pop up a simulated iPhone, and then your app would run in that iPhone, and you would be able to see. There are different like debuggers you can get, but potentially you'd be able to see something that looks exactly like DevTools, and you can inspect and see, like, you have your console. You can, you know, like the React DevTools extension for Chrome. If you're familiar with that, it's basically just like that. You can inspect everything. You can see what your state is, what your props are. So it's very similar to a web development experience. I will say this, there's way more like manual restarting. Sometimes you just get like this red screen and there's stuff on it. And so it's not as good as a web experience. It's not as smooth, which is why I prefer doing a lot of the stuff with web and then just having the simulator open so that I can double check and make sure it didn't cause some weird error. I definitely recommend having both open at once if you have a computer that can handle that. If you're on Windows, then you're probably going to want to run Android Studio so you can have it on an Android device. You can also like plug in a device. You could plug in like your Android phone, run it on there, but still have those dev tools up, which is really, really nice. So you can actually click and move around and see in the console if errors are coming up and anything like that. But if you start to develop too much on like web and then try to go back and check it on mobile and you get an error, it's difficult to try to figure out where that error entered in. So I made that mistake trying to like push forward and get things done just on the web side of things. And then it was a nightmare going back to the mobile and trying to figure out what was wrong. So definitely better to keep them, if you can't keep it open, because it is kind of a drain on the computer resources, at least try like once a day to like bring it open, run through your app real quick, you know, see what happens. You will need different test suites as well. So I don't think I mentioned that before, but you're going to run, like, you can use Cypress or Puppeteer or Selenium, whatever you like for like running end-to-end tests on web, but obviously those would not work. So if you're going to run unit tests, like, those will work fine. But if you're going to do end-to-end stuff, it's going to be totally different. So you'll have two completely different test suites. But I'm almost out of time. Any other questions? I think I have a couple minutes, but. Okay.
For styles, you mentioned must be using like the CSS and JS, React Native does. Does like React Native Web have support for like importing CSS file and translating it into that format or other options?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I'm doing it in this project, but I am. So what I do in another project is I bring in CSS files, but I have two entry points. So if you're loading it on web, the entry point goes to like one index.js file, and then it basically just points right back to the main app file, but it imports all the CSS. So there are certain CSS things, like I said, you can't use with the style sheet, but you really do want to use on web. And that's where you'd pull those in. And you'd write normal CSS, or it really could be Sass too. You just got to configure your Webpack to do it. Then you pull those in. Mobile, it totally bypasses that file. So they can be pretty much identical files, but just one has the CSS import. And you could differentiate files as well by just putting, so it could be like app.ios.js, app.android.js, app.web.js. And then when you go to import it, you import it as, I'm just importing app. And then behind the scenes, it knows, depending on the environment, which one to load. So it kind of makes things a little bit easier in those times where you really need to have separate files. Usually, like if I run into that situation, instead of cluttering up a component with a lot of if statements and ternaries, I just abstract that out, make it its own component, and then just have a couple different files with those extensions. That's kind of a nice, like a cleaner way to do it. But yeah, good question. I'm glad you asked that because I totally forgot to say it earlier. I think that's it for time for me. If anybody has any other questions, like, you can come up after. I totally forgot to check Twitter. Let me do that right now. This is the first time I tried the Twitter thing to see if anybody wanted to. All right, cool, we're good. Sometimes people are just shy about like raising their hand, so I wanted to have another avenue for questions. But thank you all so much for watching. Sorry the demo stuff didn't work, but it was a gamble anyway. I thought it might not work. But I do get a lot more things working most of the time on the live coding, so check that out if you actually want to see how this works. So thanks so much.